This is my son Ryan. He just turned 6 years old on September 30th. Picture taken at his party. Here he is, all dressed up, a couple days afterwards, getting ready to have a school picture taken. All cleaned up, nice shirt. And this happens to be the latest issue of Concealed Carry magazine, a photograph of the cover that just came out a couple weeks ago. This benign photo of a piece of candy is the actual photograph from the magazine that accompanies my column titled "In the Blink of an Eye." And it was just this piece of candy that made me realize how fast life can change. I'll explain coming up next.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great, James. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You set up a big mystery there for us now.
I did.
You better have a good story.
No, it is. It's a scary story, but I was listening to you and David in the previous segment, and I would like to expand on that because I think we have something to add to that. We talk, James, all the time about preparation, avoidance, and awareness. In fact, you and I have talked about it before. The video, the mystery there sets it up. It's my son, my 6-year-old son. He just turned 6, September 30th. And back in July, we were on a family vacation down in Myrtle Beach, my wife's family down there. And we went out to dinner, the whole group of us, about 10, 15 people. And as we were exiting a seafood restaurant, we were down there trapped in one of those little tourist areas, with all the strip malls and all that stuff down by one of the canals. And my son was walking in front of me after we exited the restaurant. We were doing the sightseeing thing and along the shops. And we're crossing a little street. And I was kind of lingering back a little bit, thinking about how I didn't want to eat food again for the rest of my life. And my son was about maybe 5 feet, 8, 10 feet in front of me. And as we're crossing the street, I hear this woman shout, oh my God, that little boy is choking. Somebody help him. And I immediately looked down, and up in front of me, about 5 feet in front of me, I saw my little boy with his arms dropped down to his side, beginning to fall forward. And it was obvious that the woman was referring to my son. So I instinctively reacted without a thought. Now, anybody who knows me will tell you that I have a horrible phobia when it comes to choking since I was a kid. It terrifies me. And since my kids were infants, I've thought about it. Now, I'm not paranoid about it, but I always have that thought in the back of my head. Even if I'm not thinking about it, it's there. So I immediately instinctively went into action here. And I dropped down to my knee. I bolted up as fast as I could. I got down on one knee, and without even thinking, I began pulling the Heimlich maneuver on my son. About 3 or 4 pulls, I could sense that he was not breathing. He was not a good situation, and I needed to fix it, and I needed to do it quickly. After about 3 or 4 pulls, I noticed that he began to react and coughed up that piece of candy that you saw in the video, which I had moments earlier told him he could have after we were leaving the restaurant. And I looked around me, and the people began to clap when he came out of it and woke up, and of course he started to cry. Later that night, it dawned on me that how fast life can change, literally in the blink of an eye, which is what happened here. One moment you're walking down the street, the next moment you're pulling a life-saving maneuver I'm pulling a life-saving technique on my own son, literally in the blink of an eye. And as I thought about it later in the night, I thought about the analogy of what we talk about on Armed American Radio or American Trigger Sports Network and what you were just talking about with David. And that is how you have to be prepared. Now, you don't have to walk around paranoid, head on a swivel, constantly looking around like, John Belushi in Animal House. You don't need to do that. But you need to have some type of plan of action. Fortunately, I knew how to perform that maneuver. And as I thought about it throughout the night, it dawned on me that this is how violent crime occurs, this quickly. As fast as what happened to my son, that forced my instant, instinctive reaction, is what happens in a violent encounter, James, and we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and that's the most difficult thing to do. Quite frankly, you're absolutely correct on that. You never know when it's going to happen. You need to be prepared for those kinds of things that do take place. But but you never know. It happened to you so quickly, in the blink of an eye, to use your words. And fortunately, you knew the Heimlich maneuver, which, you know, I think most of us probably have seen it or maybe possibly witnessed it. And but you're right. You never know when it's going to happen. And for those people out there who think that it's never going to happen to them, there's Mark right there.
Yeah, James, let me assure the viewer that, and I mentioned this in the column in the magazine, of which I'm kind of perusing through here. But at the end of the column, I mentioned that at some point in your life, something or someone will happen to you that will test your will, that will test survival skills, and your preparation for such an event will become immediately apparent. I can also promise you this: when it occurs, and it will, you had better be ready, because it will happen in the blink of an eye. Whether that's a violent encounter, which God forbid nobody had, whether it's a life-saving technique, which God forbid nobody has. But guess what? As we walk through this thing called life, at some point in time, it's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to someone you're with. You know, we all have seen this incident, you know, stuff like this. I was at the pool 2 years ago in the summer when a kid never came up, and within seconds, you know, another family member or a friend of his was actually a complete stranger, was giving him CPR, and he was turning blue right there on the pool deck. These things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people, and we must be prepared. It's why we have a fire extinguisher, or we should, underneath our cabinets in the kitchen. It's why we carry life insurance. It's why we carry a gun. And I kind of segued what happened with my son into the firearm issue. Do you have a gun? Great. That's a first step. Now you need to be prepared to use it and know what to do and how to instinctively react in a situation like that when it occurs. And it will happen at breakneck speed, I can assure you.
Yeah, you know, that's funny, Mark, because I got into a discussion. I was a member of the Red Cross and did a lot of things around the country during many disasters. And I had the opportunity of sitting down with someone, and he explained to me in the Red Cross, he said, there's a line. That line is preparation, and this line is emergency. And sooner or later, those two lines will cross. Will you be ready?
That's right. And there are things that we can do, James. It's as simple as I mentioned before. It's as simple as having insurance the right amount. It's as simple as having that smoke detector. It's as simple as having the fire extinguisher or the life and health policies. But when it comes to our own personal safety and personal defense, the first step is make the decision, as David said, not to be a victim. Prepare yourself. Make the decision, I'm not going to be a victim today. As you said, you walk through that scenario with your wife when you're traveling. I do the same thing. But the first thing is you have to get into that mindset, I'm not going to be a victim, I refuse. The second thing is you need to have some type of plan of action. Is it a firearm? Is it pepper spray? Maybe you don't want to carry a deadly weapon. Maybe you're not that type of person that can use lethal force. Then you have to alternate your plans accordingly. And you have to decide how you're going to react. But the key is this: when it happens, it will happen at breakneck speed, and you will have virtually no time to respond. So your response will be your training and your thought process and what you've trained yourself in your mind over and over again, so that we don't have to walk around like this, that it instinctively happens. I've sat back and wondered, what would have happened if I were not there? The rest of my family was up ahead of him. Would he have fallen down face first? Would one of those strangers have jumped in? Who knows?
Yeah, and that's the question I was going to ask you, just out of curiosity. When that did take place and that individual pointed out that, you know, the young man, your son, was choking, and you went over and performed the maneuver, was there a crowd gathering? Was there any other people helping or offering assistance?
No, you're absolutely. There was a crowd gathering. I liken it to the car wreck type thing, where people can't help but look. Everybody stopped. Everybody watched. And after he coughed up that piece of candy, and it was a whole portion of the candy, it was stuck. He was not breathing. But that's when people began to clap, and yay, everybody was clapping. But I wonder who would have stepped in had I not been there. Would a stranger have done it? You can't rely on someone else's help. You must be able to do these things on your own.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I was getting to was, fortunately you were there and you did step forward. Of course, it was your son. It was an instinctual reaction. If it had been a stranger, I know someone like yourself would have done just the same.
Absolutely.
But you have to wonder, because we meet so many people, you and I do in this industry. I know that I look at some people and I know that they're not prepared for anything, and that if anything were to go wrong, they'd probably be the last people I would look to for any kind of help. And I think that's probably what you're saying here is that for those of you out there who have the ability to come forward in a situation like that, be prepared. Get ready. It's going to happen.
It is going to happen. It's going to happen at some point in your lifetime, whether it be a medical emergency, whether it be an instant violent attack. I couldn't help but think about what happened to me a number of years ago down in Tampa, how fast it happened. Within seconds, literally a split second.
Now that was a carjacking, right?
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Fortunately, that incident, I was able to end that incident. But I know too many people, and I've talked to too many people. I have interviewed and written about too many people who either, and in some cases, James, they are prepared, and they're, it's life. It's what it's the unexpected. It's going to happen, and the only way to combat it is to be prepared. Right. And if it happens to you like it did to Lee Michaels, who we talked about up in Minnesota, and the carjacking, he did everything right, and he was still. Fortunately, he wasn't harmed, but because he was prepared, he wasn't harmed. If he wasn't prepared, he probably would have wound up laying on his garage floor and his wife would have found him. Right. So even though they get the car, they get the money, they don't get your life, and things have a tendency to work out. We can't read the future, but we can prepare for it.
Right. It's about fight or flight.
That's it.
And you hope that you surround yourself with the people who will stand by you or come forward when you need them. Hey, folks,
that's absolutely right.
I think we've had an interesting discussion here with Mark as well as David. I think there's a lot to be learned here. Certainly, if you have anything that you would like to add to the conversation, you know how to get in touch with Mark and you know how to get in touch with David. And hey, I'm easy to find. Thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate you coming on.
You bet,
See you again next week.